Okay, my name is Gleb. I work on Bitcoin stuff since 2015, I think, like building exchanges and wallets in Ukraine. Then I realized that that's like I can do more fun stuff. I want to do more protocol design, so improving the Bitcoin itself, but not just using it. So I decided I'll go to Canada to the masters. I started working on this topic, like on the research stuff, more precisely, and I realized that not much people do work on peer-to-peer of Bitcoin. So peer-to-peer is essentially the way nodes communicate. So we have at least 60,000 nodes deployed, which validate transactions and relay transactions in blocks across the network. And the way they communicate is essentially what we call peer-to-peer. So I started contributing to that. I have several PRs. Most of my PRs are usually a couple lines of code, but a lot of explanation and experiments, because in this case there's like not much code. I mean, like wallet in Bitcoin Core has a huge code base, but I'm not touching that. This is pretty like dense, and every line means something. So sometimes just changing one parameter is a lot. And yeah, so my work is usually like that. Sometimes it's not even a PR. Sometimes I'm just commenting on somebody's solution, saying that, okay, so I did these experiments, and what you're suggesting actually is not helping at all. So we shouldn't do this, or you should change something. So this, like for example, happened last week. That's sort of what I'm doing on a daily basis. I'm in New York with chain code, and yeah, their chain code is mostly engineers working on the Bitcoin Core software, so trying to optimize it in various ways, but usually just coding, and sometimes trying to solve researchy problems. So I'm helping with that part. So I'm trying to help them to understand papers to which academics come up with, probably make their ideas more like proven based on experiments I can run. I also try to help to bring more academics in the Bitcoin space, because I have some experience. I understand which conference that they go to. So I'm visiting here for a conference where I was presenting my work, and like there was another talk, for example, from a guy who works on something completely different. Their group found that there is a lot of routers in the world on the internet publicly exposed, and they have like trivial passwords. So attackers did intrusion into those routers, and what they actually did, the attacker, once they're in the router, they can add anything to an HTTP web page. So they added scripts which mine Bitcoin, and then so sometimes websites do them themselves. So if you know the Pirate Bay, it's now, because the government goes after Pirate Bay, there are many versions of it now. So you can run your own Pirate Bay at home. And if you Google, every week it's like a new link. So some of them have mining scripts inside there. So that's enforced by the person who runs it. But doing this on a router level is much cooler. It's like something completely different, and they actually made a lot of money. There was a talk about it. So what I suggested to that guy, that we should see how these miners can attack Bitcoin, because I mean, if a miner finds a way, if one miner has 20% of hash rate, which is certainly possible under some conditions, and they want to increase their revenue, they have a clear competitor which has like another 20%, and they can use those routers deployed on the internet to somehow redirect traffic of their competitors, so their blocks are going nowhere, and the attackers' blocks are relayed in the network. Then it's very bad for the security, because we don't want those games, and the system should be fair for everybody essentially. So that's like, that doesn't fall in the whole Bitcoin white paper security model. That's why we're trying to prevent stuff like that. So you need to study that. You need to show that, okay, so some attacks are possible, but it costs millions of dollars to run it, and if the revenue is orders of magnitude less, then it's probably not reasonable. But it's still important to show stuff like that. So that's just one example of the conversation, 1 out of 5 I had today, and I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to bring more academics in this space and work, like somehow bring their expertise in this domain, because I think in the future we want to understand what's going on here. Okay, so this talk is for those who understand Bitcoin at a high level and want to contribute to peer-to-peer research directly, or want to contribute to interdisciplinary research, which means that sometimes there is. So this talk is from MIT, where we were discussing both blockchain research and economics, and this was originally I was trying to show people who, for example, do game theory, that their work can be combined with peer-to-peer stuff. So the problem with routers I just explained to you is essentially like it's certainly possible to mess up with it, but will they do it, or will they lose more if they try to exploit it? So that's essentially a primitive version of game theory ideas, and I wanted to expand on those. But this talk is, I don't think this slide is very fair. We will cover a lot of different things which are not related to this too. Yeah, Bitcoin exists to exchange transactions. I think this is fundamental. It's interesting to understand this because blocks. So we have in the Bitcoin peer-to-peer network, we relay three objects: blocks, transactions, and IP addresses of other nodes. So you have transactions because Bitcoin is a electronic cash system, right? So transactions is the most important part. So that's the biggest feature. Then you have blocks to help synchronize transactions. So what blocks help to solve is how to order transactions in a proper way. If you have two transactions which are incompatible, so spending the same coins, in a distributed system, it's a problem they always try to solve, how to order those transactions. So which one is real and which is not. So mining attempts to solve that problem, because if you mine a block with two competing transactions, it's invalid and it's not going to be accepted in the network. But whoever mines the first valid block will choose which transaction will go in it. So blocks just help us to relay transactions. And then we relay addresses in the network just to find other nodes. So that's also a helpful tool, but transactions is the most important part. So we think the network consists of 60,000 nodes. This is based on the closed source script somebody wrote. It is closed sourced because if it will be open, it will be easy to trick. So Bitcoin is an open system. There are attempts to estimate how many nodes we have. It's not trivial because some of the nodes are under firewalls. Some of the nodes are just spies who start a node, try to read something from other nodes, and then shut it down. So we're trying to not include those. So this is estimate. It is available on the internet. Luke Dash Jr. runs one of the versions of it, and you can find. Like I can send you a link. It's not very trivial to find it, I guess, for some reason. So yeah, so that's our estimate, but we don't know. Maybe somebody managed to trick that script, or maybe that script for some reason ignores some parts. It's unclear. But most of the researchers use 60,000 right now. Except one group which says that you guys are wrong, and it's actually a bit less. But yeah, and in my work I also use this number always when I'm trying to reason about the network. So this is just one sort of open question: how to measure this more precise, because everything is sort of based on this number, at least in the peer-to-peer land. If your network is 10,000 nodes, it would be like the protocols will look different. We will reason about transaction relay differently, because like I measured in my experiments that transactions are relayed across all nodes in 3 seconds, but if the network is smaller, it will be 2 seconds. Then spine stuff change. It will be like, for example, it might be easier to spine the network, and all the research we did on spine we'll have to adjust it and adjust the parameters in the code. So when I say spine, I mean somebody seeing a transaction in the network and trying to see which node it came from. So you have public networks, so you know the nodes, you know their IP addresses. If you can distinguish that, you see a 100 Bitcoin transaction, if you can see which node it's coming from, you probably can go after that person and, I don't know, murder them and steal their coins. So Bitcoin doesn't guarantee privacy. Yeah.
Is the 3 second figure coming from experimentation on the real network?
I try to replicate the protocol as much as possible. It's actually not that difficult. There's like couple tricks we do to, well, so okay.
But I was just saying, it seems like you would need to use a simulation for that.
Yeah, that's what I've done. Yeah.
I'm saying, isn't it the case that couldn't that just be measured on the real network? I mean, obviously not literally exactly, but people could try with real world experiments rather than simulations.
It was just simple enough. So really, what happens with that? So I receive a transaction. I validate it, and what Bitcoin did in early days, I'll just send it right away. Then it became clear that if doing that, it will be trivial for an attacker to understand who is the origin, because there is a simple assumption: attacker just runs a lot of spies, connects to everybody, and then whoever sends them the transaction first is probably an origin, because they knew the transaction earlier than others. Assuming that all the links are sort of have the same speed and this speed is good enough, then it's fair to assume in most cases that it's called first spy estimator, because we just look at the first whoever sent us the transaction, that's probably the origin. So to prevent that, we have it's called diffusion. It's a part where we randomly wait before sending the transaction. So over one link, I will probably wait 0.5 seconds. On another link, I will wait 2 seconds. And then, if the spy is the second link, but somehow the transaction goes to them indirectly, then they will think that transaction is coming from somewhere else. So that works to some degree. I also have numbers on under which condition it works, and it's fairly good now. It's harder. Going beyond that requires fundamental changes to the protocol. I will talk about them too. I don't even remember where I was going with this, but yeah, we use I think 60,000. Oh yeah, that's actually the script. You will see them in the video. Probably you can post them below, or I don't know.
That's the script that you use for your research?
Well, usually I just open the website and see what does it say, because I went it was interesting. I asked once Luke how it actually works, because I asked Greg Maxwell, is it trustworthy, and he said it's as good as we can do it. So it's making it more precise. It is very untrivial. So I sort of trusted Greg in that sense. Then I asked other people; they seem to agree. But then I actually wanted to know how it works, and then I asked Luke, and Luke said, "Come in a week." I don't understand. Was he busy, or was it just he thought about some conspiracy?
When other people have asked him, he's always said, I think we might have discussed this last week. When people ask him, he says he won't reveal it, because as you said, that would reveal the methodology, and that might allow people to bias it. So
yeah, I guess he was not really aware that I'm doing something interesting.
It'd be good to know if others have looked over the script. So if Greg has seen it, then at least that's a group of people.
Yeah.
Rather than just trusting.
Yeah. So this is closed source crawler. There is a paper by these guys which saying 60 means 10,000 public nodes. So the public nodes are sort of a backbone on the network. They're reachable from almost everywhere in the internet. So they help other nodes to bootstrap. If you run a node at home, by default, it will be protected from the outside internet by your router, which have firewall enabled. So usually, I don't know, if you play video games with friends, you go to the firewall settings on the router and try to open it. So the same, if you want to run a public node and help other nodes to find you should forward ports. But by default, then it's disabled, and it's fine for the most of the people. And those are 50,000, and 10,000 are public. So that's how it is right now. So it's fair to assume that 10,000 public is a precise number, because there are websites which are checking them all the time. They may be spies, but at least they follow the protocol. So they are public nodes because they relay transactions and blocks and stuff. With private is less clear. Properties of the peer-to-peer network include security, privacy, and latency. Yeah, and resource consumption, I guess. Security is how expensive it is to attack the network. So, for example, how expensive it would be to shut down the network so that transactions are not relayed for 1 hour. In earlier days of Bitcoin, I would believe that it would be totally possible to spend $100 an hour to just disable the network, because there were trivial bugs. There were, for example, no minimum transaction fee, I think. That's why you can just broadcast transactions, empty transactions to pay into yourself with 1 Satoshi fee, and then flood the network with those. And then memory of the nodes will get exhausted of those transactions and they will die basically. So that would cost super cheap, and we are constantly improving it to make it more and more expensive to attack the network. So if it was $100 at that time, right now this would probably cost $100,000 or something, and we will also patch it very quickly. So that's security improvements. Privacy is essentially the same, but how much does it cost to de-anonymize transactions, for example? So to link a transaction to a particular IP address. It was before the diffusion with random delays I explained you. It was pretty trivial. It's enough to run one node and connect to everybody, and the connection should be fast enough so that there is no latency with like networking latencies involved, because it will add noise. But if you have a good connection, you will just trivially see whoever is the source. So we made a lot of progress there, but we need to do more. Latency for transactions, it doesn't really matter, because I said it takes 3 seconds to relay across all the network. It doesn't matter because the confirmation time is 10 minutes. So it's probably fine if you wait 5 seconds instead of 3, seeing transaction in your wallet on your phone, because it's not going to get confirmed in 10 minutes anyway on average. It's much more important. So if you go in like deeper and technical, there is a usability problem with latency, which I think doesn't matter if you add a couple seconds. But another problem is, so Matt Corral invented compact block relay a couple years ago. Compact block relay helps to relay blocks in the network very fast. It is very important to relay blocks very fast because you want miners to work on the freshest block. So if for some reason miner A found a block and started working on a block which on top of it, but miner B didn't receive the first block for 10 seconds and still working on the old stuff, once miner B receives the freshest block, the time they worked on the previous one is wasted, because it doesn't matter anymore, and it's essentially wasted security, because you can measure security of the network in the effective hash rate. Because like it's trivial to attack altcoins which are based on the same algorithm as Bitcoin, because you just can redirect 10% of the Bitcoin hash rate into those and start mining empty blocks or something. So so ideally miners don't waste energy on outdated blocks. That's why we want to relay blocks as fast as possible. And after the compact block protocol, I explained blocks are relayed very fast, but it works the best when everybody agrees on the transactions. So when everybody is in sync, because compact block relay protocol tries to I have a block. Instead of sending you the whole megabyte of transactions, I will just send you a block header with shortened transaction IDs. So I take like 32 bits or something, I don't remember the exact number. Shortened transaction IDs, I'm sending it to you. It's a small packet, so it's relayed faster. On your side, you will try to map transactions in your mempool to those short IDs. And once you map them, you see if you have all the transactions, you just validate the block, see that everything is correct, and relay it forward. If you're missing one transaction, you will have to ask it from me, and I will send it to you. So you will ask me that short ID you cannot map, and I will have to respond with a full transaction. So that extra communication means latency, and if everybody is in sync, it wouldn't happen, or most of the nodes in the network. If transactions are like relayed slowly, then it will happen more and more often, and there will be more and more cases where miners work on incompatible blocks, essentially. And yeah, this is called in the recent research proof of chain quality. How many blocks are, how often, well, the worst case is when miner B actually mines something, and now there is two blocks at the same height, but you have to throw away one of them. So that would mean poor chain quality according to this new definition somebody introduced. And yeah, resource consumption is also related to security, because I think the goal of Bitcoin is to enable its users to be as secure as possible, and I believe that running a node at home is as secure as possible. If you're using a mobile wallet, which is provided by some company, it's going to be connected, it's very likely to be connected to their node, which they run in their office, which means that if it's not using Tor, on their side, they can simply see the transaction and see which phone it's coming from by just IP address. Then if somebody goes after them, they will have to, maybe legally in some countries, have to tell whoever comes to them that, okay, so this transaction originated from that node. If you're running a node at home, there are still ways to figure out where transaction is coming from, but it's much more difficult than just going to the company. So that's just one example of why it's better to run your own node. I guess if you don't care, like sometimes I send Bitcoin to my friends, I can use that other wallet for like $10 transaction. It's fine, but it's important to enable that everybody who wants to be as secure as possible is doing it. So that's why it is important that Bitcoin works on cheap laptops. Bitcoin works on like Raspberry Pi, like tiny computers you can buy for $50. And Bitcoin doesn't require a lot of bandwidth, so you are not gonna get huge internet bills. In some places, internet is still limited. I don't know about the UK, but even here, if you live on a farm, would you get a like full, like super fast? No, not really. No. Yeah.
If you cross the country on the train, there will be no mobile internet coverage, for example.
Okay. Yeah. So that's stuff what I'm talking. But if I don't know, some farmer accepts Bitcoin, then they probably want to run a full node with all the features. But if it is too expensive in terms of bandwidth, they wouldn't be able to. Another so there is a project, Blockstream Satellite. So they're sending they rent a part of the bandwidth from the satellite and relay blocks from it, like announce blocks to the entire world. It's obviously trust in Blockstream that they provide the right block, but it helps like if somebody runs a node in Alaska, and I think somebody actually does, and there is like no internet there, at least where the person lives, but they can get blocks from the space. If blocks were bigger, if blocks were 4 megabytes, Blockstream will have to pay I think like 10 times more for the satellite capacity, because right now it takes like if block is 1 megabyte or whatever SegWit did, like it's a bit bigger now, it takes several minutes because the link is very slow. If you have $100 dish, it depends on the dish. So if you have a $100 dish, it will take several minutes to download a block. If the blocks are 4 megabytes, it will take more than 10 minutes and you will be always outdated, essentially. So that's another example why Bitcoin tries to be conservative about resources. Yeah, let's talk about the research happening. These are two major attack vectors we consider. Targeted eclipse is there is a merchant running a node. You sort of know their IP address, because I don't know, it's possible if they don't run Tor. You're just trying to locate so IP addresses in the internet usually link to the country person lives, sometimes to the city. So you can just sometimes you can figure out where the merchant is. And you're gonna buy a car from them. So you're gonna pay $100,000 in Bitcoin. So what you're gonna do, you're gonna make them connect only to you. At the same time, you will try to create a parallel chain to the existing chain. So you will fork at some point, assuming you have some hash rate or you can bribe somebody. You fork, and you start feeding them this second chain, which like network doesn't agree on. It has so we have the longest chain rule, which is every node in a network, if they have 2 chains, they take the longest. So actually, it's not the longest. It's the chain which have more work. So miners spend more effort. It can be the same length, but it can just have more work. It's actually trivial to produce a super long chain with few work from the beginning, and that's why we have a checkpoint in the code base. It's like 2012 or something. To prevent those attacks, it's essential. We can remove it, but then the network will be easier to DOS. It will be it will be possible for an attacker to make you download this longest chain, like very long chain, which at the end you download it and then you realize, oh, it doesn't have any work really. So we have checkpoints to prevent that, and there are ideas which help to remove checkpoints, but then the code base becomes very complicated. So we decided that checkpoint from 2012 is a fine denial of service prevention measure. Again, you can run software without it. But it will be just easier for an attacker to make you spend a lot of bandwidth. Yeah, so let's get back. You're connected. Attacker have this fork which has less work, but it's like a valid chain, and instead of attacker makes you connect to them exclusively. So that's called an eclipse. It's like instead of connecting to every node when it starts, it has 8 connections. It connects to 8 random peers in the network. So if all of them are malicious and it's the same attacker, you're eclipsed because you don't have access to honest nodes. So an attacker can start feeding you a chain they produced instead of the real chain, and you will don't know about the other chain, so that you will have to trust them with that. If you're connected to a Blockstream satellite or can go online or something, you can figure something, but that's often not possible. Maybe Blockstream will collude with the attacker. So what happens then? An attacker spends their $100,000 on their fake chain, and they show you, okay, I've sent you the transaction. You see, there are like 20 blocks. Give me the car. You give them the car, and then they walk away. But your transaction was never on the real chain. It was only on this fake fork they showed you. So that's why Eclipse is very dangerous.
Wouldn't that example be a bit impractical though? Because they'd have to produce 20 blocks within current difficulty parameters for $100,000 worth of gains. It's a bit
depends on how much money you're transferring.
Yeah. But that's because we were talking about this last week, and one point came up was like, oh, it's a big difference if it's just like 1 or 2 blocks, or if it's like you gave the example of 20. That's a pretty deep reel, right? So.
Well. Yes, it's also we have stuff like difficulty adjustment. Yeah. So difficulty will remain the same for like for a week or something.
2 weeks.
Yeah, that. So but that's a week, I think, or 2 weeks. Or 2 weeks. Yeah, it's like just a parameter. But I'm just saying, if there were no stuff like that, then it will be trivial for an attacker to start mining a lot of confs. If the difficulty were like reducing at every block, yeah. So that will make this attack much more trivial. But there are other problems. If you are eclipsed, you can still be on the valid chain. They can feed you valid chain, but they can clearly see which transaction you are sending. It's much easier to spy. It's also possible to censor your transactions so that your transactions are not relayed. Or if you're a miner, you will just get new blocks slower, and then you're not competitive anymore because you're mining on the outdated stuff much more often. So yeah, it's like one of the biggest threats we're considering. It's getting more and more impractical. It's usually practical when combined with some bug we find in the code base, which usually related to address management. So every node has a database of node other addresses, and if some node goes down, we're gonna pick it from the database and establish a new connection, so that we always have 8. So there was an attack where somebody just flooded. It was trivial to flood the database with fake addresses, so that if some node goes down, you connect to an attacker, and then if another goes down, you connect to an attacker again, and then another exploit used in the same research was to make node restart. So they flooded the database, and then they make that node restart, and when it goes up again, it connects to all the attacker nodes exclusively because it doesn't know about anything else. Database is limited due to scalability reasons. So if you add a new record, the old record is evicted. So it was possible for an attacker to flood the database with their IP addresses, and then when node restarts, it connects to them, and then there are all these problems. So it usually works in a combination. I mean, you can also run just a lot of public nodes. So right now we have 10,000. if an attacker runs new 50,000 public nodes on the network, it's a decent probability that some people will just accidentally choose 8 out of 8 bad nodes. It's getting less practical now too, but yeah. So usually combined attacks is the most interesting stuff, and network split is problematic because so let's say you have Chinese miners and Canadian miners, and you just cut the link which goes through the ocean, and there is no internet going through, because that's essentially. I'm not sure about recent developments, but that's certainly how it used to be like 10 years ago, I believe. There was just a link through the ocean with the internet flowing. So if you cut that, now those two groups of miners, each of them have like roughly the same hash rate, and they're just starting producing parallel chains super fast. And that's also a lot of problems. You just cut this chain quality I talked in half essentially, because when they reconcile back, half of the one fork will be just gone and completely useless, and all the payments happen on it will be useless. So that's an extreme example, but network splits are bad for a lot of reasons, which is usually related to producing blocks. Yeah.
Are there examples of Eclipse attacks in the wild on Bitcoin or on altcoins? And have you seen any of the P2P vulnerabilities that have been fixed on Bitcoin that still exist on altcoins?
Oh yeah, most of them.
Have you seen any of them be exploited on altcoin networks? We don't really look at altcoins.
Most of the alternative systems don't really care about this research. I don't know why. I'm always trying to engage with them. I'm like at least with Ethereum, I'm like, you guys, don't you want to? So the Ethan, he showed that attack I told you about, flooding the database and stuff. So he also showed that in Ethereum it's much easier to do it, because in Bitcoin we have random graph. You choose nodes randomly when you start a node. Ethereum tried to be a bit fancier. They thought if they use a cool peer discovery protocol, they can optimize block relay, for example. So it will be miners will receive blocks faster if you can create topology in a fancier shape, and it's more efficient. But because of the protocol they used, it's called Kademlia. It's a classic computer science protocol for it's actually for content search. So DHT. If you're using torrent to find a movie, to download a movie, you're probably gonna find your peers based on something similar to that. So they're like, let's say there is a list of 50 peers, but according to that protocol, you will connect with 5 of them. So they used the same stuff in Ethereum, and it turned out it was super cheap for an attacker by exploiting the protocol, because it's not suitable, to collect connections, so to make everybody to connect to them. And essentially then it means that everybody is eclipsed, because attacker just brings connections. So Ethan suggested how to fix it in Ethereum. Well, trivial fix will be just to remove it completely. Ethan suggested fixes. They implemented only a few of them, like 2 out of 6 or something. So as far as I know, it is still exploitable there. They just don't care, I guess. I feel like they're mostly interested in proof of stake and zero knowledge. So there are 2 directions they're working hard on. Other stuff, when I'm trying to engage with them, they're like, okay, so we have this lib P2P library, which to me looks like a Frankenstein's monster, where you just add this and this and this, and it doesn't do, Bitcoin's protocol is very, peer-to-peer is very precise. It does exactly what it needs to be doing, and nothing else.
That lib P2P, that's not Ethereum exclusive. That came from somewhere else, did it? Or?
Like Filecoin, this there, or whatever that.
IPFS.
Yeah, IPFS. So that's essentially that's their project. I think at least now they're maintaining it. Yeah.
So they're separate projects. Filecoin has a coin, IPFS, the P2P libraries.
Whatever. Yeah. So in altcoins, it is certainly much more possible still. I'm not sure. So I consider miners generally as adversaries we have to live with. So Usually when you're building a protocol, that's like sort of what you need. You consider miners as just people who want as much revenue as they can get. But it's very hard then to understand. So if a miner starts an attack, if people see it, they will probably sell Bitcoin because they don't like it, and then miner will lose a lot. So that's a part which is hard to analyze. This like social miners being fair and stuff. But when building a robust thing, you're trying to assume that miners can behave as bad as possible. So the famous 51% or 50 plus 1% assumption sort of tells that it's possible to do it, but it would be much more reasonable for a miner to be honest for a lot of reasons. So that's part of the how Bitcoin operates. When we're building P2P protocols, we're trying to omit that part. We're trying to so what if miners have 50% for some period of time, or approaching that, and we are still trying to build something robust even there when it's possible. I don't remember how I got here.
I asked about altcoins.
Oh yeah. And in Bitcoin,
Ethereum has a bigger problem because no one's running a full node, right? Maybe.
Well, it's a bit different. They have a different definition of a full node. So I tried to learn how it works. So the fundamental difference in Ethereum is that every block header have an explicit commitment to their state. So a state in Bitcoin would be a UTXO set, so current UTXO set, and it is not explicitly committed in a block. So you have transactions, and you can, by replaying all blocks, you can get that set. But for example, if you had it, and then imagine that nobody stores the history, because why we would need it if we just have the recent block, or like we just have the headers which are valid, and then we can somebody stores a snapshot of the state, and then you just see the header with the state, you just download the state, and now you can work from that. So nobody will need to download the whole Bitcoin history from the very beginning if we committed that. The problem with that is that if nobody stores it and miners agree to print their shitcoin on the smart contract and adjust the state, just like build new shitcoins out of nowhere by, for example, I don't know, like no paying gas or doing some weird DeFi, I don't know how to pronounce it. So now you're adding this extra trust into miners. You're allowing them to explicitly stay the state without replaying the history. And if nobody will replay the history now, nobody will even find out that they did something. And if you did replay, but like you're the only person which have capabilities to do it because it's super expensive, then how can you tell everybody that, okay, so there is something wrong there? And maybe if you tell, people will say, okay, but miners did this only once, it's like fine, let's like accept it. So we just never wanted to go in that direction, and Bitcoin was designed. So this was discussed in early days of Bitcoin. Should we commit it? It will certainly help with a lot of things. Yeah.
Right? There was long discussions about
UTXO. Well, yeah. UTXO. I guess I'm just like sometimes things are called in the same way, so I'm a bit afraid. I feel like there was something like that, but I forgot. But yeah, it was discussed. So as proof of stake was discussed in like 2012 or something on the Bitcoin IRC channel, and the conclusion was it's very hard to build something simple enough and secure, so something you can reason about. We are still learning stuff about proof of work. Like there was a talk about proof of work today where they combined this selfish mining, it's like alternative mining strategies where you behave slightly different, slightly maliciously, and then you can get revenue. So it's sort of fundamental to proof of work, but people still building on top of that, combining ideas. And I'm just saying, I think proof of work is simple, and yet we don't understand it in full. It's going to be even much more fun when we're getting out of subsidy. So there are two parts of the block reward: subsidy and fees. And subsidy slowly goes down. So right now it's 12 Bitcoin per block. It will be 6 in a couple of years, or I don't know. So then it will be 3 and so on. So this block, I'm not sure if I'm I wanna tell that. It's just when it will be just based on fees, or fees will be the majority. There are like new weird minor strategies, because if you see a new block, and it has like fat transactions with high fees, it might be reasonable for you in future, instead of building on top of it, just try to compete with it and steal all those fees. Because maybe you will mine a block which doesn't have transactions, or like they're like really low, but then you don't get much. You get like $200 from this block, even though you did a lot of work. But if you fork and steal the transactions from the other block, you can make more. So that's like sort of dangerous future. We don't know what's gonna happen. There is some research on it, but I think there should be more research here. And
so that's effectively the incentives for withholding a transaction with a high fee goes up as the proportion of that transaction fee to the bot reward goes up.
Withholding, like just forking, just like
You would want to reward.
just refusing working on the real block you see.
Refuse to mine on a block that has that transaction with the high fee that was mined by somebody else.
Yeah.
Because you want that transaction.
Yeah, right.
So you've mined.
Yeah, so right now it's not reasonable, because most of the reward is the subsidy, so you don't really care about which transactions are bigger. But we don't know what's going to happen with fee market. This is like certainly possible. And yeah, so I'm just saying, with proof of stake, it's much more complicated. It's like, I have no idea how they're gonna reason about it. It seems very hand wavy now. Well, there is the protocol doesn't exist, I think, yet. So yeah. How did I start this?
Again, I keep bringing you on talk.
Okay.
But like on just on the Eclipse attack before we move on. So I mean, you're relying on a victim of an Eclipse attack to report it, right? Because you don't have a view of the network. So the network.
Who is you? Who are you talking about?
I suppose you as a researcher monitoring whether an Eclipse attack is happening.
I'm just planning to. I'm trying to make it much more expensive. So for example, right now you have 8 connections. If we do 16 instead of 8, it will be more difficult to do Eclipse in a certain ways. Certain ways will still be simple. So for example, if you just go to the internet provider of the person and just bribe them, and just tell them, okay, so disconnect them from all the nodes except mine. So that will be still possible no matter how many connections you have. But if that's not possible, but you're considering other ways to attack, for example, by just launching a huge amount of nodes, then going from 8 to 16 very significantly affects the cost. It will be much more expensive to attack in this case. But going to 16 requires more bandwidth or more memory. So as a researcher, I'm trying to optimize those things so that we can enable this higher connectivity. So that's what I'm thinking. When we detect, like nobody really detects, like the way we detect eclipses is we see it on Twitter. So it's not even eclipse. It's like somebody in Russia complaining that they cannot receive blocks or something, and then we are trying to figure out what actually happened. But like, I don't have any extra capabilities. Like there is no admin page in the Bitcoin project where I can go see what person they're connected to. I just have to, like, if they want to cooperate, I can ask them, okay, what's your IP address? What were your connections? Can you try this command and the command line? But it's like, you can do this as well. And I have no like authority.
The only idea I'd have would be periodically changing your connections so that you somehow detect that there's a separate network that an attacker is feeding them the wrong blocks.
We're discussing that. So it's usually called peer rotation. So right now you connect to 8 peers and you will be connected to them forever. So as long as, well, if somebody of them goes down, you will connect to somebody else, but you connect to them forever. Because of that, the topology is sort of static. So if over time somebody can learn the topology, then they can, maybe they will spend a year, but they will know who you're connected to. And then to eclipse you, they can, I don't know, bribe those 8 people, for example. That's probably sometimes not realistic, but I'm just, sometimes to explain an attack, you go the most trivial example. But if we had rotation, and it takes time for them to learn the topology, it will change more fast than they can learn it. That's why they will be always chasing us and not finding us. The problem with that is, imagine you change your every peer every minute. Then it's possible that you will accidentally connect to an attacker through all connections, and then super fast they will flood your database of addresses, so that, again, this database is limited and it's certainly vulnerable to certain stuff because of just how it is built. So if you're connected to an attacker exclusively, they can mess up with your local state. So and there is this assumption which I don't like, but so far I think we're gonna stick to it until I propose something more precise. So right now there is a general intuition that older nodes are more trustworthy, because like people were running Bitcoin in the early days, they're probably not spies. It's much more probable that spies are running nodes like more recently. So probably just if we have 10,000 public nodes today, if tomorrow 5,000 nodes are like deployed at once, probably those are just spy nodes or some activity. But yeah, but I'm just saying there is this rough intuition I don't like, being more positive towards older peers.
Are Tor peers any more or less at risk? Because obviously there's fewer of them, but I don't know, is it harder to eclipse them?
Not. There are like different ways to eclipse it.
Yeah.
I don't think there is any particular. In some cases there will be correlation, but it's also it's more complicated. Like we are discussing this stuff. We're like I'm trying to. So rotation was proposed at least 3 times, and I was the last one. I was last summer, and I sent an email to the mailing list. I'm like, why nobody responding? And somebody told me like, oh, you're like the 3rd. And what happened before? Somebody suggests, okay, let's rotate every 2 minutes, and Bitcoin developers ask, okay, why 2 minutes? Why not 4? Can you prove us that we're not making things worse? Because you can imagine that spy nodes are more reliable. So they can spend more resources, though they know they're always alive. While usual like regular nodes at home, sometimes there is an internet outage or something, or a person just reboots their machine. So because of that, reconnecting, like rotating peers, might be even more dangerous. So the way I'm trying to push peer rotation, the first step is to try to separate the functionality of links. So there is transaction relay, block relay, and address relay. Transaction relay seems to be very hard to not make it leak information. So it's like there are trivial ways to find that you're connected to somebody through transactions. How you do this? You send TXA to one node, and then you send TXB, which double spans A, to almost every node in the network but one. And then by looking at that one remaining node, you can see if it has TXA, that it is connected to the first victim directly. If it has TXB, it's very likely to be connected to the rest of the network. It doesn't not be connected to first node. So I'm not sure these companies even are aware of this stuff, because they're not very technically like advanced. Sometimes they tell me, oh, it's so hard to de-anonymize stuff. No, it's not. You're just not doing it properly. But we're trying to improve it. So the stuff we're like the trivial changes discussed this week. There is a Bitcoin review club. It's like super cool. It's a discussion online every week for an hour for discussing a particular PR. So it's open to everybody. You can just join and try to see how this process goes, like how we're discussing this in real time. It helps to get a sense of what Bitcoin core development is.
Bitcoin core PR reviews, right? Is that
Yeah.
free node, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a website and stuff.
Oh yeah.
So this week they discussed a PR. Should it be possible to ask a node for a transaction? What? I don't want Flash. Should it be possible to query a node for a transaction it never announced to us? Because if we allow this behavior, I believe this is what I might be a bit wrong. So if it is possible, it's essentially trivial to see how transactions are relayed across the network, because you start relaying TXA, and start asking everybody in the network for TXA every second. And then first it's only the first node response, then in a second it will be the second node to respond, and that's an easy way to learn who is connected to who by just like seeing these waves of transaction relay. It's like a fluff, essentially. By doing this several times, you can sort of map the topology. So the solution was to not respond for stuff unless you explicitly announce it to that node. And since we have delays for announcements, it's much harder. But yeah, the PR is mostly about some code changes. It's not much code. It's like probably 50 lines. But yeah, this one is pretty chill, and it's for peer-to-peer, so pretty high level. So you might enjoy it. I'm not sure. Maybe it already happened today, but they have a track of existing discussions, so you can just go through it. Yeah, style block rate. That's what I started recently calling chain quality, trying to follow the work of other people. It's wasted work in a proof of work sense. Yeah, with this attack, it's more possible to make minor. Yeah.
Did you say you have to leave at 7:30?
Yeah. Why?
Because we've only got 15 minutes. Are you going to talk about Erlay? Because I was hoping to hear about Erlay.
I have maybe. Oops.
Can you stay longer, Gleb?
Well, I mean, I can have more, like a bit, 15 minutes. I have this. Do we have a pencil?
Yep. For the board, yeah. If you can stay longer, then you can take as much time as you want. But if we've only got you for 15 minutes, we need to cover it.
Well, I want to be there by 8, and it's probably 20 minutes walk, so I have a bit extra time. But are you guys familiar with this? So how it works before? You receive a transaction. You're not receiving a transaction. You validate it. So you have 8 connections. Let's say your node is under firewall. You're receiving a transaction from your wallet, your mobile SPV or whatever, or you sign a transaction on the desktop and feed it to your node. Your node will validate it. If it is valid, your node will announce the transaction to all your peers. Your peers are looking up the transaction in their local database by hash, because announcing means just sending the hash. They're looking in the database. If they don't have it, and they don't have it because you're just the first, they will request the full transaction from you by hash again, so send a new get data message, and then you will send the full transaction. What happens then? They all do the same thing. So this is your node, and let's say you have these 2 guys and somebody else. So they started doing this again, announcements somewhere else in the network. But if these 2 guys are connected, this will probably receive it a bit faster, for example, and then they will announce it here again. So this node will receive the same announcement for the same announcement twice. It actually adds up to so total bandwidth per month right now is 30 gig. I believe this is gigabyte. It's always confusing, you know, there is a GB or like, yeah. So 30 gigabytes a month.
So they just send the full transaction. At the moment, they just send the full transaction to everyone, and they all accept it. Is that how that works in Relay? Or is the hash how it's happening now?
No, we are already doing hash. So if we were doing full transactions, this will be like through 100 instead. So this is how it was. I don't even remember if it was ever that bad. Probably it was. Yeah, so right now we have 30 gig before Erlay. I'm on the 30 gig. About, I don't remember exactly, about 14 gig is TX body. So the stuff you really need, like signature, amount, who is sending who. Another 14 gig is just announcements. So sending those hashes more than you need. Usually announcement is 32 bytes and the transaction is something like 250 bytes. But since you're receiving this announcement, so this node may receive it 8 times, because if this happens too, and if this is like slightly slower than other nodes, it will receive it 8 times, because you can really multiply this by 8 and it will be like something 256. So this becomes, you're wasting more on this useless announcement, sort of useful, than the actual transaction body. And that ended up, like, we want to save this. We want to not do 8, we want to just 132. Well, if it was possible to do no 32 at all, but just sending bodies, this would be even cooler. But this is unfortunately possible for example, in a star topology where there is a central hub, and hub knows what everybody has. So it receives transaction from here. It knows that these guys will just need one message. So that's how we can eliminate this part. Unfortunately,
you couldn't do that here because if I just send it to one of my peers only, I can't just trust that it's automatically going to get out to
right.
the network.
Sending to everybody is important, because so that's like, it's redundancy in the distributed system. You're doing more than you need just to eliminate trust in a single point. And so if this guy is corrupted, these guys will still help you to relay your transaction. So ideally, we want to do 32 or approach this at like 34, so that we can have this 14 gig, and there is also 4 gig for stuff like block headers. Sometimes there is a like message just addresses, so helping other nodes to learn the IP addresses of all the nodes in the network. So that spends a bit of bandwidth too, but it's like we don't care about it much before we fix this. So instead of this, Erlay does like 1 gig or a bit less. How we do this? Instead of sending to 8 is not super precise. I will try to show it here. So let's say this is a public network, which are reachable nodes, which help other nodes to, and so they all create 8. They create 8 connections to somebody else, but they also accept connections from this private node. And some of them accept like 100 connections from private nodes. So if they receive a transaction from here, they will not just send to 8, they will send to all the links they have. So they send to this, and this. And this node, since this has 8 connections, this is like very likely to be useless because somebody is probably sending the announcement anyway. So the idea here is, this is slightly different scheme. At the first stage, public nodes announce the transaction among themselves. So trying to not reach everybody, but trying to be one hop away from everybody. So if most of this network knows the transaction, then these guys are just one hop away, and they can learn it through super efficient set reconciliation protocol. So it's a bit slower for them. Every 2 seconds, these guys, private nodes, take one of their 8 peers in some order, and then trying to learn the new transactions from that peer in a very efficient way. So what usually happens, this private node will have a list of, actually I have slides on that. I was presenting on today. So give me a second.
And the public nodes are listening nodes, are they?
Yeah. Like we are all confused with that. Like, I mean, there is no agreement.
Reachable, in other words. Reachable.
Yeah, reachable.
But just not inbound, outbound. That's different. That's
yeah. And it's also it's a bit of simplification because, for example, I was running Node in the university, and it is not reachable for the most internet, but other universities see it. So it's like it is under firewall, but it's not. The firewall is not exclusive. So in practice, it's just not that often that happens. So that's why the model simplifies it to the degree. Okay, I have my slides.
For some reason, it's not.
Yeah, no, I turned it off.
Okay. And there's erasers for the board as well if you want to go back.
Okay. So this was for like people who don't know Bitcoin much. So I just explained what's Bitcoin. Yeah, so this is a bit more precise. So we have 30 gig per month total, and we spend 18 gig on just flooding transactions to other nodes. Actually just announcing them. And yeah, this is the existing protocol where you send a hash and get a request if they're missing it. This is what I showed you. How bad is it? So the part above is like the really necessary stuff you need in a a protocol with trust minimization. Everything below is what you can optimize, and it's like a substantial part. So we are trying to optimize that. Yeah, we want to increase connectivity to prevent eclipsing, to what I just showed you guys. But if we increase the connectivity, that part which we want to optimize goes much faster. It becomes like a huge part of the bandwidth. It's like several times more than we actually need to spend. Yeah, this is the parts which I was mostly focused on. Yeah, so this has nothing to do with block relay. I told you block relay have very different goals. In blocks, it's important to be as fast as possible. So blocks are relayed in milliseconds. Every node in the network knows the block in milliseconds, unless you run on the Tor and there is a like slow Tor link, or your internet is slow. But usually, yeah. So there are these cool ideas and different like graphene and Xthn are in Bitcoin Cash. Yeah. So topology-based routing. The simplest example is star topology, where there is a central hub. It's trivial to optimize it, but it's not. It's vulnerable. A feedback-based approach. Imagine you're adding to every transaction. You're adding some information saying which node's already seen it, so that if you know that somebody saw it before, you don't relay it to them. But then it's very easy to map the topology if that's attached. You just see a transaction and you're seeing how it was propagating, and then yeah. So we cannot do that. So we had to invent something new. These two parts, rapid low fan out flooding. It's low fan out because you're not relaying to everybody, but you actually do relay just to 8 outbound. So even these guys, even though they have a lot of inbound connections, they're not gonna announce it there. So what happens in practice, the public part gets it relayed like in a fast way. We reduced the delays. The delays were 2 to 5 seconds. You remember before sending it, not sending right away a transaction, but waiting a bit to try to make it harder to de-anonymize. So we had 2 to 5 seconds. We have half second to a second. It is fine because what matters is this is the ratio. I don't want to go through it. So I'm saying it's sort of safe to reduce the latency. I showed it that's possible. So these nodes are getting it super fast, and then the private nodes are usually learn it through reconciliation, and yeah, this is probably important. So everybody is connected to everybody. Node A receives a transaction from somewhere in the network. Node A relays it to B through regular protocol. So announcing, getting the request, and sending the full transaction, like in a flight-in way. But you should notice that node A doesn't forward it to C and D because it's limited flooding. So we are not sending it to everybody, but just to a subset. And B forwards the transaction somewhere else in the network, even though they are connected to C and D. They just don't choose them for relay. But node B and every node has this local state where they track which transactions they would have sent to their peers. So they wouldn't send it to A because it came from A. A already know it, we don't need it. Don't need to send there. But C and D, we don't know, maybe they're missing it, and they indeed do. So we're just gonna add the transaction to those sets. And then the same thing happens with D. D receives transaction 2 from somewhere, relays it forward, we don't know where, and adds it to the peer B in their local list. So they think that they don't know if B have it, so they are gonna add it to the list and consider it later. Now there is some timer at B. It happens every 2 seconds. Every 2 seconds B takes a random a peer from the queue, and in this case it takes D. So it says, okay, it's time to reconcile with D, it's time to exchange transactions we learned. And then there is a super efficient protocol I'm going to talk about how to help each other to exchange these sets. So in this protocol, B will help D to learn TX1, and D will help B to learn TX2. And it's important to clear the sets. So you see, and the next, after reconciliation happened, both of them have both transactions, and they clear the corresponding set. But then B starts reconciling with C. So B still have these two transactions for C, and they're gonna do the same protocol and again sync it efficiently. What really makes it efficient is that it arranged in a certain way the time in and these really low fan out relay directions so that transactions are relayed in a uniform way. So usually what happens in practice is that, how to do it efficiently. It happens something like this. So most of the transactions are shared. So there is like little difference. In a regular protocol, what Alice would do here, it will just send this all transactions, so 8 identifiers, to Bob. Bob will receive it, compare it to what they have, and find that Alice is missing 15, and will send 15 over and request full TX10. So it turns out that the most efficient way will be for Alice to somehow guess that Bob is missing TX10, and for Bob to guess that Alice is missing TX15, and just to send it over or announce. There is math which allows that to do it without guessing. So that's called usually like something like approaching information theoretic limit. So it's not possible to be more efficient than that. If I want to tell you that London is a capital of Great Britain, I should say at least 6 letters. I should say at least London. Like, I cannot deliver you this. I mean, I can cut the word in half, but then it's possible that it's overlapping with some other city. So so there is math which allows to approach that possible bound and achieve the same efficiency as if we were super lucky. How exactly it works? Alice, so the trade-off we take here, Alice have to estimate the difference size. So in this case, difference size is 2 transactions which are different in sets in total. So if Alice underestimates, if Alice thinks the difference is 1, the protocol fails. We have some ideas, and we're gonna implement them, how to handle that. So, but the default way is just to fall back to the existing protocol, and then you just spend a bit of extra bandwidth compared to the existing one. In my simulations, this happens in 5% of cases. We underestimate and we have to run the existing protocol. This isn't good enough because we still save a lot of bandwidth. If Alice estimates 2, everything is super efficient. If Alice estimates 3, it will essentially have to spend like 10% extra overhead. So send 1 extra item which they didn't need it. So, but it's still much more efficient than regular protocol. According to which, so in regular protocol you will have to send 8 items, 7 items in one direction, then 1 back. If Alice overestimates and think the difference is 3, it will send an equivalent of 3 items, while ideal is 2. Okay, so Alice have a difference. Alice computes a sketch, so a shortened representation of their local set. Sends the sketch to Bob. Bob computes his own sketch. I will show how. Then Bob combines 2 sketches in an algebraic XOR function, and then from the product of that, Bob can see what was the actual difference. So Bob can find TX10 and TX15 as a product of that. So let's say every identifier is 32 bytes. So like we were discussing this before. In a regular protocol, Alice will have to send 32 times 7, plus Bob will have to send 32 to announce 15 back when they found. If Alice is estimated precisely, so finds the difference to be 2, the sketch will be of the size of 30 times 2. So really, the size of the sketch will depend on the difference, and then Bob will send this 1 item anyway. Yeah, but it's like.
Can I ask also, because I see in the paper you actually say that the elements of the set are like 64 bits, so they're shortened identifiers, right? So you don't actually send the sketch doesn't consist of items that are 32 bytes, they're just like 8 bytes, right? They've got a quarter the size, is that right?
Yeah, so we also, at first, one trivial optimization to the protocol will be to send shorter hashes. So So the full hash is this. What if we cut it like by 4? Because Bitcoin doesn't have much transactions, they will still uniquely map to the full transactions most of the time. We didn't do this before because it solves only the so the cost of relay one transaction across all the nodes is number of peers times number of connections times some constant, and this is like usually referred as O of something. So what a cool protocol will do, like mine, it will just remove this because it's like irrelevant. It's like it should not depend on that. It should be the same cost no matter how connected is the graph. Every node should receive the announcement once. What cutting this by 4 is just optimizing this part, making this smaller. So you sort of solve the problem a bit, but if you want to increase the connectivity, your function will still depend on that. And because there is some engineering effort with testing and deploying this feature, we decided that we wouldn't do this unless we can solve this part. And then we can do both. So we actually minimize this as well. So yeah, but here I was just trying to get an intuition of the orders of yeah.
Do you want me to clear the board?
Huh?
Do you want me to clear the board?
No, it's fine. So yeah, so exactly to compute a sketch. So let's say you have elements from 1 to n, and then yeah, I will do it. So let's say Alice have a set 1, 2, 3, 4, and Bob has a set 1, 2, 3. Let's say the difference is 1. In this case, Alice just adds all the numbers. It's 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, and sends this sum to Bob. Bob will just does minus 1 plus 2 plus 3, and then 4 is the answer. So 4 is that one difference we had. So Alice just sends one number, and Bob computes his local number, Bob subtracts, and that's finding the missing transaction. This will work with like any numbers. So this is usually how some of the checksum protocols work. So for example, you know that you have 16 digits on your credit card. So last 2 digits, I believe, is a checksum. So if you fuck up in some random digit, the last 2 digits will help you to find that you fucked up somewhere, because last digits are not randomized, they're pre-computed. So they look at 14 first digits and then deduce from them the last two correct. And so it's like this idea is coming from the same ones. So this is a trivial checksum of just correcting one error. You can do this with a credit card too. They probably do something fancy, I don't remember. But it's a bit more difficult when you have difference of 2. So let's say Bob will have also 5. So now the difference is 4 and 5. So it will be not enough to do this, because Bob will have minus 5. The answer will be minus 1. Oh, it's plus. And from minus 5 you cannot tell much. So apart from this, Alice will have to send square roots of all her numbers. So like 1 square plus 2 square plus 3 square plus 4 square. Bob will do the same locally. Bob will still compute minus 5 as for first syndrome, it is called. And Bob will also have second number like 23 or whatever. They will do the same. They will compute this locally and subtract one of them. So they will minus 5 and 23. This becomes a system of linear equations. So like, you know, like 3x plus 5 equals 7, and another one. So from this you can, it's like known fact that you can find both x and y, and this will be the difference. Like 3 and 5 is something deduced from here. I don't remember. It's a bit more complicated, but it's still understandable. So you just take these two numbers, plug them in the system of equations, then you solve it, and then you can, the answer to the system, is it called system in English?
Yes, system of equations.
Okay. Yeah. And then the answer will be those two transactions you were missing. So that's how it works. And then if you have difference of 3, there will be 3 equations, and like x, y, z, and there will be 3 numbers you plug there.
It looks like it's related to the fact that if for example, the a here were roots of a polynomial, you've got like the sum of the roots and the sum of the square of the roots and the sum of the... So given that set of data, I think it's called Vieta's formulas, you can sort of invert that and find the polynomial coefficients. There's a relationship between those two.
Yes. So it works with polynomials, and we do revert. We actually do. So revert in a polynomial, I believe, is not efficient. So we do something else instead, or we do it in a non-trivial way. So we had a library. It's called Minisketch. We published it last winter.
I read on Seeker's thing about it. There's some things about the set of equations that are very sort of specific. It's not just like a random set of equations, which means you can do it in a really efficient way, right?
Yeah. Yes.
The coefficients are repeated in different lines.
Yeah. So Peter did a lot of crazy work of pre-computing square roots of everything, like up to 64. So he has like 13 to the power of 128. He probably has it in some like dictionary in the library, so that every time you need to compute it, you just look it up. So you just go to this array and you read from the memory instead of computing it every time.
So the same philosophy is in limsec P2P6K1,
Yeah.
where they've got there's some flag, context flag or something. There's a thing called a sec P256K1 context, and it's basically pre-computation of enormous quantities of different multiples within the so that when you finally have to do an operation like find the public key and private key or whatever, it just happens like in a microsecond instead of like 1 millisecond, and that's why everything's so fast. Basically, it throws it all in memory in advance.
I believe there it also helps with constant time. So it's important. It's important in cryptography to do everything in constant time. So don't depend. So how computers work? If you have 2 numbers, like 2 times 3, is computed much more fast than 17 times 13. Even though the numbers are like, for computers it doesn't matter. It's like the same data structure. It's usually like integer, but this will be much faster just because that's how like transistors work and stuff. So by looking at the electricity consumption of your mobile phone, for example, if you have access to the battery, you can guess what were the numbers. And if that's a private key, you just will eventually, maybe not from the first attempt, by just looking at the energy your phone spans, you can guess what was the private key bit by bit. Because of that, there are like different ways. So one way will be just to remember both of these products. So pre-compute them, and just every time you see these 2 numbers, you go to some cell of a big memorized thing, and then you look it up, and both of these operations will take the same electricity. So that's why it obfuscates the fact that there were different numbers. So it's just a trivial introduction to constant time stuff. Yeah. So this actually, it's a good practice to do this if you do some cryptography. Yeah. So Minisketch is better than the existing whatever. It's like really milliseconds to. So the most expensive operation is once you found these 2 numbers, 5 and 23, how to go from them to transactions. So solving this, I think also going from this to this is expensive. Computing the square roots is not. So I measured that operation because we want that to be fast, and it's on the cheap machine. It's like and we are usually in that bound, because we reconcile every 2 seconds. Bitcoin have like 7 transactions per second or something, so we're gonna be somewhere there. So 100 microseconds, yeah, pretty good. And that's the result. We save a lot of bandwidth, and the bandwidth is constant, so it doesn't scale with the connectivity. So that's like 2 biggest contributions. And then it takes a bit longer to relay transactions, but I told you why it is fine in the beginning of our discussion. Yeah, good for the security, because we actually realized that we slightly improved the chain quality, so miners are even in better sync. It happens because this public network, the relay there is faster. So because if we reduce the latency, they will relay faster. And then if miner has a block, even if miner runs a private node, it sends a block here, and they will be all in sync. So it will be very fast going to the other miner. Instead of in a regular protocol, some of them will don't have it, and there will be extra latency. So we actually improve it, even though the overall end-to-end latency of transactions from here to here might be slower a bit. Yeah.
I think I need to dig more into the math, because like if it's lots of transactions,
Uh-huh.
say the sum, like in your basic case, the sum is like 100, and then the second party's sum is like 105.
Uh-huh.
That doesn't necessarily mean the second party's missing 5. They could have completely different transaction sets.
No,
that
but
sum up to something similar in terms of. What's that?
That's why it's squared, isn't it?
yeah, you're
But a crucial part of the protocol is they have to estimate what they think the approximate difference is going to be in how many. Like you said, whether it's 5, it could be 5 different transactions that are different in the symmetric difference of the two sets, or it could be 20. So according to the paper anyway, they have to like try and estimate and be quite conservative and sort of slightly overestimate, right? Because if you underestimate, then you fail.
If you underestimate, we just fall back to the existing protocol, and because we have initial conversation with the node, it means that we are spending actually more than we used to spend with the original protocol. We don't want that. So I just found, like, I did a lot of experiments, and we found how to make it the most reasonably. Yeah. So what exactly if you have 100 and 105?
If it was just integers,
Uh-huh.
then a lot of the time you'd have no idea whether the second party was just missing transaction 5, or whether they had completely different transaction sets, which summed up to 2 totals that were different by 5.
So,
but I think as OpenNoms is saying, because they're square roots, they've got crazy decimal points.
He's actually talking about squares, not square roots. By the way, you were just saying square roots.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's correct. So it is correct on the slide. So, but it's not about so one cool trick I cannot explain here because it's a bit complicated. It helps you to detect problems. So if you underestimate it, looking at these 2 numbers you ended up with, you can tell that something went wrong. So sometimes they're just like, okay, I got these 2 numbers, but the difference were 3. So you can clearly tell. It is possible by looking at them, say that, okay, so we underestimated. We should like do something else. So I cannot explain right now how exactly these 2 numbers will look, but it's like it's in this case you estimate a difference of 2. So you have these 2 numbers and you probe them. Are them real? Can I recover from them to the system? And I guess if you think like systems sometimes don't have a solution, well, not in this case, but yeah. And in that case, you know that you failed. So that's what you explain, I guess. Huh?
It's almost like a binary pass-fail rather than I kind of think.
Yeah. So block relay protocols, their ideas are often they're like succeed in 99.99%. It didn't work here mostly because like same math didn't work because they have constant overhead. So our cost strongly corresponds to the difference. There is no flat data you need to pay. In those protocols used for blocks, there is usually like flat 1 kilobyte. Yeah, it would just like eliminate the whole usefulness because 1 kilobyte is more than the entire thing. Which is in blocks, it's fine. Yeah. Blah blah blah. Yeah, there was a lot of trying configurations. Should I relay to 2 outbound and some inbound or something? And we just found Erlay to be like we found that the most bandwidth conservative configuration is actually pretty fast. So we don't need to optimize half a second latency, but it's possible to. Yeah. I guess this is the conclusion. The last 2 things are just really side effects. I was trying to measure, so are we making something worse? But then it turned out to be a bit better, so this was a result too. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much, Dan.
We should solve high level problems first. So that if everybody understands the same thing, then we can go to that question. If you guys.
Did people follow? Was it interesting?
Oh yeah.
Everyone's kind of followed, so there's no like basic questions.
I mean, it's this. What drawback could this added latency would cause? Because obviously it's not a problem with mining because it's not about the block relays. So with just latency.
No, I told you, there are fundamentally, there are two dangerous things about increasing transaction relay latency. First, it's usability. If it takes 15 seconds for a user to see it in the wallet, then it probably becomes a bit of bad. But if you go from 3 to 5, as I do, we think it's fine. And the second problem is, if miners are not in sync and nodes in the network are less synced in terms of transactions, blocks are relayed slower and chain quality goes down. So there are a lot of wasted blocks. But I just tried to show that it's not the case, because while the overall latency going a bit up, the latency which matters is better.
But if they would be in sync the same way with the blocks, it would be just transactions which would be different.
No, but transactions affect block relay, so that's important. Compact blocks protocol, Matt designed, work as efficient as possible only when everybody agrees on the transactions.
Or when they're all in their mempools.
Transaction from the block.
Yeah.
From the last block they are trying to relay. Because I was telling that they're trying to send short IDs and then the node tries to reconstruct the block, the full transactions from the shortened IDs locally. And then if it is missing at least one, there will be an extra communication. That's why it might potentially, relaying transactions slowly might potentially harm. But when I was trying to, somebody asked, does it? And then I measured, and it seems like because of the protocol is arranged in a specific way, for that problem doesn't exist. It just, yeah. I'm not sure I want to go any deeper. It's like,
can Erlay work with Dandelion?
So I guess it's so Dandelion is another transaction relay protocol which focuses more on privacy. So how to prevent spies to learn the origin. So instead of relaying to all the friends, peers you have, you will choose one and relay to one. And then that one will relay to one. And then on average in 10 hops, it's randomized. So in 10 hops on average, a node will start related to everybody. So it's hard. It will look to the spy that was the source, or maybe, because it's very unlikely that during this, they call it stem phase, just like one link. It's very unlikely that there will be an attacker on that link. It's likely that the attacker will see it after the fluff phase, where it sends to everybody. So that's a Dandelion idea. There are difficulties with implementing Dandelion in Bitcoin because of the implementation we have. It's very hard to build Dandelion in a robust way. So it's either exploitable, or it will require having memory for a separate mempool. So you have like maybe 100 megabytes for mempool. To build a secure Dandelion, you will have to allocate another 100 megabytes just for Dandelion transactions. Or if you don't do this, it will be either trivial to attack the system or make Dandelion useless by attacking the protocol itself. So we were like trying to see if somebody can implement Dandelion without allocating another 100 megabytes, and it seems like nobody really can. So we are some researchers are trying to do one hop Dandelion, so instead of 10 hops, one. It's a bit less private, but it's more practical. So there are no problems like that. You don't need another mempool. So we are looking forward to that. If I'm not like somebody else working on it, we will see if that works. Then we'll probably integrate it. So the question was, is it compatible? And yes, we have first low fan out phase, and you just replace that with Dandelion. So instead of low fan out to 8, you just have this stem one link, and then after that you do low fan out redo. So yeah, it is totally compatible with Dandelion. I hope Dandelion is getting implemented sometime. It's a cool idea, just hard due to some practical reasons. Yeah, what was it?
The formula you wrote
action hashes, it will be just 64 bits. You will have a little bit of what is it called? Collisions. But because there are not many transactions, that will happen not frequently. So it will be probably, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. And does this work have anything to do with the public network Anycast?
No. Well, I mean, I guess Anycast is like broadcast. So it's like the whole computer science concept where you, instead of doing regular like send receive message, you subscribe to some channel, right? And then you're sort of listening to it passively. and that was never really practically used in systems like this. Well, in some it was, but it was always more of a research stuff. I don't have a good answer why, but no, it has nothing to do with that. You wanted to ask something? No?
Any other questions?
Maybe I have a small quick one. There was on the TFTC, you spoke about the Tor nodes, botnets on Tor nodes spamming the Tor network to bring it down.
No, yeah.
Is that so? Can you apply that to Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's what. So 2 months ago, somebody showed that it's super cheap. So Tor is an anonymous browser and a network associated with it. Somebody showed that it costs only $10,000 either a day or a month. I don't remember, but it doesn't matter. It's cheap enough for American government to do it, to make Tor network very slow and almost not usable. So every time user will try to use it, it is very slow and nobody will use it. So it is a very low cost to do it, to do this attack. And what they do is the attacker, they just hire a botnet. So it's called a stressor. So it's sort of test my service, is it robust enough to high load? But it's usually a lot of hacked devices in the internet, like smart fridges and all that. Sometimes it works in a different way. Sometimes it's just computers. So a hacker usually have a central control over those devices, and they're just telling guys, start sending traffic to this victim. And then if you choose victims as Tor relay nodes, they just think it's like a regular internet traffic, so they try to anonymize it because they cannot tell what is honest and what is bad. So they do it this way. I wanted to show, and I still want, what you can do with Bitcoin with this attack. So can miners hire botnets to attack other miners, for example? So if you can use this to to attack the node of other miner, they become not competitive. They cannot relay their blocks because they don't have good internet if you're attacking them. So I'm still looking forward to that stuff. I did a bit of write-up, but I'm waiting for somebody with a botnet expertise to come. I'm trying to find them because it's hard to estimate. For example, in practice, do those botnets and stressors have enough capacity to attack the Bitcoin network? Because in Tor network is smaller. There are just less computers. So it's not clear, I'm looking for some PhD student who want to do research to go and see how many capacity they actually provide. And then how much it would cost in total, and so Amazon Cloud have some machine learning to filter botnet traffic. So nodes running on Amazon will be not attacked by it, but it's about 5 to 10% of our nodes in total. We want to make it smaller, but that doesn't matter. I'm just saying that should be taken into account. So the understanding botnets part is where I don't have enough time. It's probably 100 hours just going through it. But if somebody with an expertise I can find a conference like this, then it will be much faster. So I switched to a different direction now. That's a bit frozen for now. Yeah.
I've got a couple of quick questions. One is as a researcher or a guardian of the network, you have to employ different strategies to the strategies that you'd push in terms of core software to just normal users, right? So in the previous discussion around potentially detecting Eclipse attacks, you'd potentially want to set up certain strategies on your node as a researcher that would be very, very different to the software you push to normal users. Is that true?
I never had to.
Because maybe as a guardian of the network, you want to try and detect Eclipse attacks in a way that a normal user wouldn't bother. And so maybe you'd have a few stable connections, but then you'd want to rotate your other connections, which would be a totally different strategy to what a normal user would do.
I don't think it will help much. Even if I detect, first, I don't see a good way to detect it. There are ways to detect spies. So for example, Greg Maxwell from time to time asks people on IRC to send them their list of peers, and then he intersects two sets. So there are a lot of nodes in the network, but if Greg and another person have a common peer, it's very unlikely event. It means that that's probably a spy. If 3 people have the same peer, it's certainly a spy, and we should ban them. So I guess that's sort of what you're talking about. One of my research ideas, how to make this without telling Greg what the actual set. So there are like multi-party computation protocols which allow this to do privately. I just never had time to really. It's like I don't know how research is this. Maybe it's just like a weekend hacking project. It can be on a centralized server in some applications. Like I would totally send my list in a private way to Greg's server. It doesn't matter if we can find the spies in this way. It can be done on a peer-to-peer layer, but it's probably going to be more complicated, and I'm not even sure we need that complication in a protocol itself, because then grinding new IP addresses is not that hard. Attacker can just, once we do this, they can trivially, sometimes not trivially, but just use more IP addresses, and it's not doesn't work anymore. Yeah, so that's the
I suppose an academic researcher looks very much like a spy. So it's very difficult to determine whether it's a spy.
They do, yeah. They complain to us that sometimes we disconnect them for no reasons.
Okay, and then last question: have you looked at the P2P challenges on the Lightning Network, or is there are there enough challenges on Bitcoin base layer? It's a very high level answer.
I'm trying to contribute to Lightning too, but it's changing too fast. Like I'm starting thinking about something, and then the next month they're like. So somebody published an attack on Lightning last month or so, where they just their channels accumulate too much, and then they slow down they fail all the payments. So they just provide a lot of capacity so that a lot of payments go through them, but they fail all of them, which makes Lightning much slower than it is. And you don't spend any money, you spend only on-chain fee to open those channels. You don't spend the actual transactions. So, but then they published, and the guys from Lightning said, okay, so we accidentally fixed this last week. So now it doesn't work in exact way. So I'm just saying, yeah, it's probably still cool, but I'm trying to find a more creative way, like fundamental. Like probably there are applications for Erlay in Lightning, but it's also sometimes hard to coordinate with like Rusty Russell and.